I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 Podcast.
What's up, everyone? It is Ricci here from the F1 Podcast. Happy Wednesday. Today is April 3rd, 2024. Recording this a couple of days before the Japanese Grand Prix. I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Andrew and Erica. Always lovely to see you. How y'all doing?
I'm doing wonderful. How is everyone doing today?
Just doing dandy over on this end of things.
We are halfway through the week. It will soon be Friday, and we will wake up at crazy hours to watch the Japanese Grand Prix.
Wake
Without
up,
further
just stay up and don't go to bed until 4 a.m.
Do a barrel roll.
Is that when it is? It's at 4 a.m. Like
No,
when
it's
it
at
finishes?
1 a.m. But there's a lot of rain going on, so I imagine there'll be a few safety cars and there'll be some red flags. So it'll be like a 2.5 hour race.
Yeah, no, I might just catch the highlights of that one after.
You know, I think some articles have come out this week that I think we should probably highlight that normally that probably don't get the light of day on our podcast, and I think it's probably really important. I think let's first
So you
start
mean the
out.
one that we learned that due to Carlos Sainz's recent performance is he's going to stay at Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton doesn't have a seat for next year now.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with like April Fools, because you can't really believe anything that comes out that day.
But
I
it's
love it.
also that reality is so crazy already that people will post random stuff as a joke, and I'm just numb to it. I'm like, yeah, that may as well happen. That may as well be what's going on right now.
Speaking about news, Formula E, for those that don't know, they had their race in Japan this past weekend, and they hit record viewerships and engagement gains. I'm not going to go through all the details, but just really quickly, they saw a 40% increase in TV viewership in their first four races, jumping from 62 million in season 9 to 86 million in season 10. Broadcast audience have grown by 37% and a 44% boost in social media impressions. I mean, we talked about like the influence of Drive to Survive and a number of things, but like it's kind of nice to see that I wouldn't call it a spillover effect. I don't know if that's a fair term, but you know, there are some quality drivers that race in Formula E that probably don't get the light of day compared to what Formula One gets.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if a lot of people, I'm pretty sure this last season of Drive to Survive where they were talking about Nick DeVries early on would have been one of the first times they'd heard of it, right? If they haven't been very involved in motorsport for a long time. So I'm curious if it's one, a lot of people are just super into it now and they're looking for things to watch on off weeks when there isn't any Formula One happening. And two, if maybe what drew them to that specifically is the fact that now they're seeing like, oh, Nick DeVries was a talented driver, came from Formula E.
Well, in fairness too, there's a lot of ex F1 drivers, F2 X that used to be promising F2 drivers now also race in Formula E. So it's decent competition. And I'm looking at the standings right now. Pascal Wehrlein, who used to race in Formula One, is a Formula E world champion. Is through I think 5 rounds, he's leading the championship by 2 points. So I also think this is also due to people just wanting to find excitement in a sport where there's close battles, and then that there are close battles in the standings as well. Ironically, F1 has become that due to Australia, but I can see why people has gained excitement with regards to Formula E. It is the formula of the future, right? As we move
Yeah.
towards EV vehicles, we're going to see more of these zero emission style racing systems going on. And you even see that in Formula One with the fuel that they're going to be using, right? Is going to be net zero by I think 2030. In that sense, it's going to be exciting to watch. The one thing I can't get over about Formula E though is the sound of the cars. It's like, oh, it would be great to
I
watch,
did.
but it
I
sounds
did.
weird.
I did watch the highlights, and yes, you and I, all three of us are so used to the engines of Formula One now, and especially as a Ferrari fan, like the V10s and the V8s back in the early 2000s. And yeah, it's gonna take a little while to watch when I watch more Formula E, but
Like that sound is so annoying that the microphone on Zoom didn't pick it up for a hot second. It just immediately was like, we are not having this. But I was going to ask because I've never watched Formula E. I was like, is it like a Prius? Because you know, like a Prius when it's in EV mode makes no noise. So I was wondering, I was like, is it just silent and you can hear your own thoughts like a whole bunch of Priuses driving around the track? But evidently I was wrong and it's far more annoying than that.
But if you ever watch like a Formula E race, they have some cool opportunities there. Like there's no DRS systems, right? But they have um I think there's times where you can push a button to give your more like electric power into the engine.
Yeah.
So or not, it's not even an engine, but in the battery so that you can then go do overtakes and stuff like that. There's fan voting components too as well, where fans can vote for certain drivers to get a minute boost during the
Ooh,
race.
What?
Yeah, and then
that's
there's all
so fun.
at least that's what I used to be able to do. I don't know if they still able to do it now, but I remember watching just a couple Formula E races a couple years ago based on that. And then also there are certain points on the track where if you go off the racing line to drive the certain path, then you are then able to get like a minute of electricity boost right away. So you kind of offset, you kind of take off the racing line, maybe lose a position, but for you to then get that extra power for overtaking.
So like stupid question, do they charge when they go into the pit lane? Or is that
No.
like the Le Mans?
No, so the cool part about F3 or Formula E is that you you only have a battery for the weekend. So you have like 100% to start the weekend, and you have to last that all the way through to the end of the race. There's no charging of batteries during the week. It's just changing of tires as you would in F1. But yeah, so it's funny watching some of these races when because they have like the the energy bar on the side of the race, just kind of like how they would for timing. But it shows like sometimes they're like down to 0.9% battery life or 0.8% battery life. So they have to like manage, it's like fuel load managing, but with the electricity power.
Wow, because like they obviously do have the fuel monitoring and stuff for F1, but that's
Yeah,
crazy
no,
because
that's
like as much as you have to budget fuel, I feel like it's not as intense because you have to have a reserve left over, so you budget to have extra versus this battery, you're just kind of you're screwed if you don't have the right strategy.
It's quite interesting.
I know this is not a Formula E podcast, but I'm curious if anyone's battery has ever died toward the end of a race because they haven't budgeted it well and the car just like slowly comes to a stop at the side of the course.
I could only imagine like are people allowed to get on the track and start
I
pushing
know you're
you?
just
Like
kind of
what?
like, or is it like a Tesla where as soon as you take your foot off the gas and there's no battery, you come to a screeching halt all of a sudden? Like, I'm so curious to know what this looks like. So, yeah, if you know of a podcast where someone talks about this, or you have, I know Google exists and I could very easily Google this, but I'd rather hear from you.
They, to be fair, they
Let me
do
just
race
page
at a
Braden
lot
real
of
quick.
like tracks where there are a lot of corners to not a lot of straight speeds so that you can have opportunities to recharge because the batteries are rechargeable, right? Too.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of opportunity for you to recharge the battery so that in a way you don't, miss out on or like, have that happen to you in that case.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. You know what this kind of reminds me of? Is it in Super Mario Kart where you got like the kind of that line that on the track if you go through it, then you go like extremely fast. Like we talk about like how they can get this 1 minute
The
like
rainbow panels.
yeah, this is what I'm kind of thinking of.
It's like Rainbow Road for Mario Kart Double Dash on GameCube, where there's just like this one long strip of the little rainbow panels that give you a speed boost.
So speaking
Oh,
about
Lord.
boosts, let's talk about Liberty Media because they've made some news this week. Another acquisition. They bought out MotorGP in a deal valued at 3.6 billion. For those that don't know, the US media giant that took control of F1 in 2017 purchased the series from Spanish company, is it Dorna Sports, which owned MotoGP since 1992. Yeah, so 86% of Dorna's management retaining the rest of the business. It's expected officially completed by the end of the year. The Liberty Media president and chief executive officer said the company was thrilled at expanding its live sports portfolio and said that MotoGP is a global league with a loyal, enthusiastic fan base, captivating racing in a highly cash flow generative fiscal financial profile. So I guess like opening up the thoughts, They really are committed to the motorsport for Liberty Media, and you know, what's next?
I'm so curious to see how this pans out. I've never been super into MotoGP, but holy cow, that is a terrifying sport to watch. And just a round of applause to anyone who's balls to the wall crazy enough to do that.
Well, they've had to
It's
adjust the Red Bull ring for when the MotoGP happens because they can't go down that long straight after
no,
turn one anymore.
no, because you die.
Yeah.
That's but it is another branch of motorsport that's been around for a super long time. So some other stats from the article that we pulled out. I didn't realize this, but MotoGP's first season was in 1949.
Hmm.
That's a long time. Like I know motorcycles have been around for a long time too, but I always feel like when people talk about the history of motorsport, it's always been with like a four-wheeled car and stuff like that. It's never been talking about bike racing and stuff. So kind of neat to see them come into the fold. I'm curious though because I feel like the knowledge of MotoGP is even less than what Formula One was prior to Liberty acquiring F1 in 2017. So I'm
Mhm.
anxious to see kind of what the plan is, what they want to do with this.
Well, for
Well,
MotoGP, I find it's very hard to access watching it on TV, right? You have to go to like a third party, like a Red Canada channel or one of those like specialty channels to be able to watch MotoGP. I think now
mhm.
with Liberty Media building it, with purchasing it, they're gonna utilize the same model or growth models that they did with Formula One. So, expect a Drive to Survive similar series going on Netflix in the next couple of years to get new fans, especially in North America involved in MotoGP. Expect they do 20 races a year. Expect that to grow to more Grand Prix across the world. And I imagine it's gonna become more accessible to watch everywhere in the world now with Liberty Media.
And I should actually attest to this to you, Andrew and Erica, because when I was in Rome this past September to watch, and we were in a one, I think I talked about this on the pod before, but it's very hard to find like a bar or restaurant that really has TVs in there that's not really like the European culture, other than if it's like an English pub or Irish pub or Scottish pub, like just that's just their the lifestyle. But I remember trying to watch the Italian Grand Prix, and they actually had the MotoGP on beforehand, and how more accessible it was to watch in Europe. So kind of I can see that maybe I don't know if like a TSN or a Sportsnet comes into play here, or maybe they run it off like something similar to F1 TV. But I know, yeah, I guess that time will tell to see how this plays out. But I wouldn't be shocked if we see like a MotoGP like Drive to Survive style. Curious what the name of it would be. Anyone want to take a fun guess what it would be called? Wheels Up? Or that's too
No,
plainy.
because that's like plainy. I'm trying to think. I'm like, I don't even know any motorbike racing terms. Like, I always think about the knee down going into the corner. And so I don't know if there's some kind of
What do you call
term
it?
for that.
Need for
Need for
speed.
speed.
I think a
That'd be
certain
good.
company called EA would not allow that.
But it would be like KNEED. Yeah, it
Now,
could.
I'm curious too if you've seen a lot of growth through like the F1 video game too, right? Now that
Yeah.
Liberty Media is kind of taking, I almost wonder if the same approach happens with MotoGP, where they get, now that it becomes more popular with Liberty Media, does it get bought? Like, do developers become like EA as opposed to like Milestone or Black Rock Studio, and then people now it becomes more accessible for MotoGP in that way? So I'm curious to see how this kind of all transpires, but there's a lot of opportunity to grow the sport in many facets.
This was really cool to first talk about these two non-related Formula One topics, because I know it's been a slower week, but let's bring it back to the F1 world, because this actually kind of shocked me. McLaren announced David Sanchez has left the team as part of a technical restructuring. He only joined the team in January from Ferrari, but he says the role he envisioned and had agreed to was not aligned with the reality of the position I found. Um, I didn't think that the first three races were that bad for McLaren. But like, is this kind of, I wouldn't really call it shocking, Andrew, Erica. I don't know who wants to start with this, but I thought like things were looking okay. No, like I mean, with maybe Zach Brown be signed to a long term contract. He thought maybe like this is not the vision forward, he thinks, but it seems like following a number of discussions over job responsibilities, it just like maybe just it did not make sense for him being there anymore.
Yeah, like you said, it's been a good start to the season, so I don't feel like McLaren F1 might be what's rocking the boat. I am curious though, because as we know, McLaren historically, all of their different racing divisions were using a lot of the same technical resources in the past. It is only recently that they started splitting it out, so it's like a different team working on IndyCar versus F1, stuff like that. So, what I'm interested in is understanding if where the differences lied for Sanchez were in the organizational structure. Just there's probably still a lot of leaning on resources from some of the other teams from having split people up and moved them all over the place. And coming from a team like Ferrari, where things are very much like you stay in your lane and you're working with people also focused in that same lane, it might have been a bit of a difficult situation for him to enter and to kind of like start managing and building things out. But I am also curious if maybe they were just like, I mean, I've been in this situation before too, right? Like I've taken jobs where maybe the job description, because the organization's going through a like challenging time or because they have like a new project they're tackling, the job description's not super well thought out ahead of time. And it sounds awesome. You like the people you're interviewing with, so you take it, and then you get there and you realize, oh, like I am not set up for success. This is not going to be everything I thought it was. And it ends one of two ways. Either you leave like he did in this case, or you kind of drag it out because you're excited and you're like, well, I made my choice. I may as well follow through with it. And then you get sacked a few months afterwards. So I don't know that it's anything specifically with the F1 team at McLaren, but I do feel like he found himself in a little bit of a weird organizational situation, and it might have just not been the best environment for him to really like set down some roots and do the work that he was hoping to do.
Well, it almost sounds like that's the case because McLaren mentioned that they want to streamline their concept and performance department to focus on like overall performance, and that will be led by Andrea Stella in the interim until a permanent appointment is confirmed. But he made a comment. He goes, "This further step in the evolution of the structure of the technical department and of the working model within the team signify our commitment to constantly enhancing our technical capabilities and workflows for greater efficiency and effectiveness." What was he doing then to affect workflow and to, reduce technical capabilities? Mind you, he did come from Ferrari, so maybe that's the case. But nevertheless, I'm curious what the original position was 3 months ago that he signed up for, and then why is there a misdirection all of a sudden? Because to be honest with you, you guys really haven't had that poor of a start. You're sitting
No,
third
I've been quite
comfortably.
happy. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, this is a big improvement over this time last year. Big improvement. So much so that my MacBook has the fireworks thing going up because I put my thumbs up. It
Do you almost wonder if he came into the role more so, was McLaren really just excited about last year's kind of ending results and figured that they were going to become more of a challenge to Red Bull than that they are already? And then with that said, that didn't come up to hasn't come up to snuff yet. So I'm thinking maybe maybe Zach Brown wants to avoid what that experience he had at the beginning of last season and put that behind him so that his team is constantly pushing forward and kind of ensuring that quote unquote no mistakes are made. But that's become really cutthroat at that point.
Well, and I'm kind of curious, and I'm sorry, I don't mean for it to come off as slanderous to Ferrari, but I'm just reality of the situation. Sanchez had been there for about 12 years, right?
Yeah.
So he'd been there when things were pretty good and when they were starting to look really good and then started to not look so good again, like the last couple of years. And so I'm also wondering if from his standpoint, did he really think it was a good fit? Or was he just wanting to get out of Ferrari and accepted this position, hoping he could make it work? And it wasn't what we thought it just wasn't living up to the expectation, like a grass is greener type situation. And or does McLaren just have a really shitty espresso machine?
Do a barrel roll.
Or better yet, is like their leader, like Michael Scott, doesn't really have any
Entirely
direction.
possible. Entirely possible.
There is a way though when you work at a company for so long, like 12 years, and you kind of your values and your day-to-day routine and operations, like you attract to that culture, you attract to those core values, right? there may be a difference in that, and Sanchez has maybe had a struggle to adapt
Yep.
in that case, and that I thinking Zach Brown again does not want to be put in the same position that he was last year. He wants to continue pushing forward towards a title in that case. You know, we've seen the Drive to Survive, the pressure that he was like tremendously under at the
Yeah.
beginning of last season, right? So I think he's always trying to look forward, you know, ways to move forward. And Zach Brown's becoming more of that cutthroat leader, which I think McLaren kind of needs in order to grow to become number one in the sport. So
He can't be buddy buddy all the time. Like he needs to
yeah,
show some leadership and has to well like and a good example is the whole Daniel Ricciardo situation. Like
Yeah.
he was adamant just you're gone. Like thanks for the one win, but like you didn't really live up to our expectations. And then putting their all eggs in Oscar Piastri and just it's clearly showing. So
It's paid
uh
off in spades at that point. Like, I think the other one, I'm also curious too, because a lot of the Ferrari management and stuff, I do think it's still a cutthroat environment because it is the pinnacle of sport and one of the better known teams. But just
mhm.
like my own father went and he's worked for a French company his entire career, but the atmosphere working under North American leadership when he was based in Canada versus working under the more European leadership when he was in France. Same company, same products, a lot of the similar type of work. Arguably the job in France was like supposed to be more cutthroat, but just the management styles are so different that sometimes there are people that it's a little bit more laissez-faire, easygoing. You've got a little bit more time to ramp up and hit the ground running, but then there'd be other people, and he was kind of the jerk from North America who came in, and all these French people were like, "What is this guy doing?" So it could just be that there's the misalignment and kind of like you were saying, Cleary, the management philosophy and culture and style between the two, and it just wasn't gonna. One person was a little bit taking it a different approach than the other and not good for the long term.
Think about it as a competitor standpoint. So you have Ferrari that's in Italy, and it's pretty much them there. Then you go to the UK. So if he flies to the UK, he's got McLaren, he's got Williams, he's got Mercedes, he's got Aston Martin, all probably within a couple hours of each other, of them just trying to duke it out themselves. It just maybe he kind of was like, whoa, okay, I kind of miss being in Maranello where it was just the only focus was on us. Now it's all these other teams, which is kind of running up the news cycle. But I don't know, like we wish Sanchez well and hopefully he can land somewhere. But yeah, I kind of was a little shocked with this whole not lasting long. But hey, you've been with the team for what, 12 plus years, and you take a shot somewhere, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like my mind, I wouldn't be shocked if Ferrari calls him back. I think so far, like things are looking really good in Maranello. So I don't know if he's going to be getting the phone call yet. Alex Albon has conceded that Williams will need to be quite sensible in their approach to the next handful of races as he and his teammate Logan Sargent continue to drive without a spare chassis.
Yikes.
And like there's also rumors about like how the team principal, maybe there's a potential coupe going with him. But yeah, it's going on over there in Williams.
Bit of a mess to not have a spare chassis in this day and age. That's an anomaly, not the norm in the year of our Lord 2024. It definitely added a little bit of tension, I would say, to the team to have to make that call, because I feel a lot of people, I mean, a lot of us will see, we don't think that Sargent is necessarily as good a driver as Albon, but I still don't necessarily think that was totally fair to him. And what is this with the coup d'etat on, like, people want to get Vols out?
Brought somebody in, and that's like, this is the recipe of potential of James Valve coming out. So like bringing somebody in, and then more or less like he came into this position at Williams, leaving Mercedes as an opportunity for him to show leadership. Mind you, this is probably the test for him as a team principal this season compared to last year. But yeah, I don't know if this is the sign where going into the weekend, if they don't produce again, like when does those conversations of team changes happen?
It would be interesting for Williams because this is now becoming a pattern, because their last team principal wasn't there that long either, was he? Year and a half, maybe two at most. And then Claire was only there for a couple years before him. I would kind of be wondering at that point, if I were an investor or something, like, one, what's up with our hiring process if this is the result we keep coming back to, that every year and a half 2 years we're kicking people out and finding new team principals? And second, is it the team principal that's the issue and not something else that's a little bit more ingrained and rooted in the organization as a whole, right? Because at a certain point, like once is an incidence, twice a coincidence, three's a pattern. And I'd be starting to ask some bigger questions.
But I kind of wonder is she, I don't know why she's upset because like when she, not to be mean or anything, but when she was team principal, the team was not competitive
No,
whatsoever.
no.
And when she sold the team off to Dorilton and they kind of brought in Yost to set the other, I think they've always wanted James Valles from the start. Or maybe that's kind of what the viewpoint is, but after the stint at Williams accumulating his position of strategic direction, right? I think they brought him over to help continue to lead that way. And she's made the sense that she's obviously very territorial about who brings in Williams and who's running it and representing it right now. They're trying to maintain the Williams family legacy in that way, and I don't see why James Valles is not the best person to do that. He's bringing them into an era of Formula One that they just when you hear
But they're not in
comments
the
last
basement anymore. Other than
exactly.
like this, the struggle of this season is like he's proven to somehow put Albon in a better position than this Logan, but able to get them actual quality points and get them out of the basement, which they've been struggling for years. Go
And
ahead.
not doing things in Excel all the time. I'm just going to keep harping on that until they do better and we have more proof of it, because that was absurd to me that they're like building the car using Excel. Like,
So with like about 10 minutes left of this episode, I think two more things I kind of wanted to talk about was like silly season is still very much upon us. And even though we're trying to figure out who's going to take this second Mercedes seat, we're trying to figure out where Fernando Alonso's going to go. Is Audi really a deal for Carlos Sainz? And now, like for the first time probably this season, Sebastian Vettel's being mentioned of coming back. Sky News reported that he said on Wednesday, well, potentially I am because I haven't got a drive, but the question is, am I looking for one? And it depends on the package. I retired from Formula One not to come back, but did I say you never know? So I think it still stands.
the other quote I saw was that someone asked him if he was in talks with Mercedes, and he says, well, I've been talking to Toto. I don't know if that counts as Mercedes, but I guess you could say so. So he's being courted by the big dog at the very least, and there's some line of communication between the two of them.
Well, wasn't he recently testing the new Porsche hypercar too as well? That's maybe kind of got his juices flowing back into racing. I think his last couple of years at Aston Martin were tough because when you're kind of it's you want to retire, right? You're kind of going through the motions at that point, right? Just wanting to get towards the end of the season, maybe. Just I don't think his head was fully into it at that
Yeah.
time. But now that you're stepping away, you're taking away from the sport, right? For a couple of years, you kind of regain that passion, right? And that drive. And there is an opening at Mercedes for Sebastian to come in because there is a second seat available, right? So why not take advantage of that opportunity if you feel like you still have that chance to keep going?
Really quickly, I think also is this kind of a situation like a Michael Schumacher? You retire, you spend some time, and then you realize you probably get bored, and then you're like, okay, I want to come back. But also, I don't know if the paddock still misses him, but I don't know if he takes like kind of some senior role to George Russell, because I know George looked up to him on the grid. So I'm curious to kind of see if this actually goes through, but that's kind of what I was thinking is that, or even if he doesn't come back as a driver, does he come back as like a senior advisor or something, or some sort of coach? If that's even possible in the Mercedes garage.
I think that's an interesting point about the coaching, because, like you said, I feel George is a very talented and good driver, and he's done some good stuff with what has been a challenging car to drive the last few years, but you can tell from the radio that his mental game is not totally there. So to have some kind of performance coach, if they are trying to like change gears and talk concept of the car because the concepts haven't been working, who better to help than someone who did the whole Red Bull, Ferrari, Aston Martin thing, has a wealth of experience across different teams and cars in order to maybe give you a little bit of insight and help, or even just help with testing or something like that, you know? So I think if he's not coming back in that seat, which I think he'd be incredibly beneficial to the team at this stage of the game, were he in that seat, um, it would be interesting to see him back in another capacity in like a support role for the team. Maybe sitting on the pit wall, maybe helping with something else. I don't know. F1 keeps reminding us of the whole B thing in Japan last year. So there's still love for him on the grid and people still want to see him. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
No, I'd like to see him back. I'd like to see him back in a competitive car,
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
right? Like Aston Martin wasn't competitive when he came over to help build that, right? Then Fernando's taking that on, but it would be tough just to watch. I understand if it's like a team like Audi and they're wanting to build off, kind of do what similar idea that, Schumacher did with Mercedes. You're just going to be there for a couple of years. You're going to show the team the ropes, right? In terms of development, you're going to be able to race in a few more Grand Prix, and then, you'll be able to effectively retire after that and kind of lay the groundwork for the next generation at that team. I don't know if Vettel wants to do that, even though his idol, right, did. I don't know if Vettel wants to do that overall. I think he still wants to win championships in a way. I think he still wants to win Grand Prix too. Um, maybe he wants to come back to help solidify some of his records that Max is quickly hunting down as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the overall case, but I think this is just a case of he's been out of the sport for a couple years now. He truly misses it and he wants back in.
It's like Fernando going away for that brief hiatus and then coming back.
But you kind of need that to reset your mind, right? Especially when you're just, after a few years in a row, it's the same old stuff, right? You're going through the motions. You don't have a competitive car in a way. And, we're talking from like 2020 when Ferrari weren't competitive, right? They had struggles with the car. 2021 Aston Martin weren't competitive. 2022 Aston Martin weren't really that competitive as well. So it's 3 straight years of not having a competitive car. You kind of you lose your sense of place or wanting to be there in that sometimes, right? Especially when you feel like you have the capabilities, but the car's not there. So you need to take away that your time from the sport, and then regain your passion for it, right? And look how that's done so well for Fernando.
Agree with that kind of philosophy, Andrews. Like you go away for a bit, you come back and you like kind of like in the same like what a vacation is supposed to be is you go back and recharge. Going into this weekend, because I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on the team. Just really quickly, what do you kind of like, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute, like what are you kind of looking forward to this weekend? I think one, if weather's going to be a factor, it's like a 53 lap circuit. You have 18 turns. We have, mind you, 4 previous Japanese Grand Prix victors on the grid, people that have won here before. How is Red Bull going to respond after last weekend? Can Ferraris be competitive on a track here in Japan? Sonoda score more points at his home Grand Prix and really kind of jab Daniel Ricciardo as the better driver. So that's what kind of I'm looking forward to this weekend. I don't think Red Bull's coming back with a beautiful white livery that they had the last time around, but yeah, those are kind of my thoughts going into Japan.
Hey, McLaren's got a special one though, so there'll be some neat little design going on there. But I'm hopeful for Tsunoda because he didn't really get an opportunity to race last year. I think there was the reliability issues plaguing the car at the time, so he just kind of didn't get to race in front of his home crowd, which sucks. But if it's anything like the last few years, there's going to be some drama. If it's raining again, that always leads to a little bit of added chaos. Hopefully, this time there's no safety equipment on the track while people are driving, as we have had happen in the past. I don't know. I'm excited to see kind of what drama shakes up and what the leaderboard looks like at the end of the weekend.
I think people that we need to really watch are Yuki, obviously, because it's his home GP, but Racing Bull engineers are really impressed with his development since the start of the season. And, he continues to be like the one that people don't look up to in terms of, finding that potential for that seat, maybe a seat next year at Red Bull. I think he's going to want to push harder now that it's his home GP to showcase why he deserves a seat at the top team. And maybe I almost wonder, it sounds crazy, but could he be pushing for like, especially if there's rain, if there's chaos that happens, does he finish in the top 5 this weekend? I know it sounds insane,
Ooh.
but it could anything could happen if there's rain in the race, right? And with that extra motivation. Now to the flip side, we have to take a look at his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, because given the ultimatum, he has no room for error. And if he does not score points over this race and in China, he will be out of his seat, and Liam Lawson will definitely take his place. So I am curious to see how that will pan out. And then continue with driver market themes as well. I'm thinking Carlos Sainz again. Can he continue on his great form in Australia to Japan, considering that the driver market now is warming up with his thought of kind of putting him into the mix for Mercedes second seat? So is he going to continue to create more of a case as to why he should be in that seat through this weekend? And it would be quite interesting to see if he would win back-to-back races. I think the gap is going to be obviously closer to Red Bull. I think Max is going to have a chip on his shoulder from last week. He's going to race his heart out, and I would be excited to see if Ferrari can keep closing that gap to Red Bull as well.
Time will tell in Japan this weekend. So make sure you tune in for the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. I am Jonathan Ricci with Erica Hollingsworth and Andrew Cleary of the F1 Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for your support in this week's episode. We got a lot to think about this weekend. We got a lot of racing to happen this weekend. And make sure to follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, and I think I got them all. Oh, and forgot about Threads. I think we're sitting at 933 Instagram followers. We are trying to hit 1,000 before the Canadian Grand Prix. And as always, continue to follow us on social medias. We love your support, and we'll see you after the Japanese Grand Prix. Thanks so much, everyone.